The cruelest goodbye is not the one spoken at the door, but the one hidden inside a toast everyone applauds. Naomi Brooks learned that beneath 300 crystal chandeliers, inside the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, where the champagne was cold, the silverware was polished like mirrors, and every smile in the room had been trained to look expensive. She sat at the head table in a midnight blue gown that touched the floor like quiet water, her hands folded beside a plate she had barely touched, her wedding ring catching the light each time she moved. Across the ballroom, New York's most powerful donors, developers, judges, doctors, and socialites lifted their glasses toward her husband, Caleb Whitmore, the billionaire who had turned a modest family property company into one of the most admired hotel empires in America. Cameras flashed as he stood. He looked perfect, as he always did in public, tall, composed, silver cuff links shining beneath the sleeves of his black tuxedo, his pale blue eyes carrying the calm authority of a man who expected every room to lean toward him. Naomi had once loved that calm. She had once believed it meant safety. Tonight, it felt like a locked door. The gala had been advertised as a celebration of the Whitmore Foundation's housing initiative, a project Naomi had built from handwritten notes, church basement meetings, and late-night calls with shelter directors who knew every family by name. She had spent years turning Caleb's money into something warmer than wealth. A roof for a mother and her son, a scholarship for a girl who walked 2 miles to school, a second chance for people the city had learned to step around. But when Caleb raised his glass, his eyes did not find his wife. They found Serena Vale. Serena sat 3 chairs away in a pearl-colored dress, her smile soft enough to look innocent and sharp enough to cut. "Tonight," Caleb said, his voice smooth through the microphone, "I want to honor the woman who saved my empire this year." The room turned toward Serena. Naomi remained still. "Serena Vale reminded this company how to be seen," Caleb continued. "Her brilliance, loyalty, and vision brought Whitmore Group into a new era." Applause rose like a wave. Serena lowered her lashes as if humbled, but her hand rested lightly near Caleb's empty chair, claiming a space no one had offered her. Naomi felt the sound of clapping move through her body without touching her heart. Around her, people smiled with the polite hunger of those who sensed a story forming. No one mentioned that the foundation's first shelter had opened because Naomi refused to let Caleb turn an abandoned building into luxury condos. No one mentioned the winter she personally delivered blankets in a rented van when Whitmore Group's public relations team called the effort too small for press. No one mentioned the woman who had stood behind the empire long before Serena taught it how to pose. Naomi looked down at the dessert spoon above her plate, untouched and perfectly aligned, waiting for a sweetness that suddenly felt insulting. Beneath the table, Caleb's hand reached for her wrist. His fingers were cool, controlled. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he whispered without looking at her. Naomi turned her face toward him slowly. In the chandelier light, her deep brown eyes did not tremble. They did not beg. They simply saw him clearly at last. "I didn't," she whispered back. "You did." Then she rose before dessert was served. The applause weakened, then scattered into silence. Her chair slid back with a soft sound that seemed louder than the microphone. Caleb's expression tightened, not with concern, but with the first crack of losing control. Serena's smile faded by a fraction. Naomi picked up her small black clutch, touched the edge of her wedding ring once, and walked away from the table with the kind of dignity that made gossip feel cheap. The ballroom doors opened ahead of her, spilling golden light into the long marble hallway. On the walls hung framed photographs of Whitmore Foundation projects, smiling families, ribbon cuttings, rebuilt homes, children holding oversized keys. Naomi passed them one by one, recognizing the faces, remembering the names, feeling not bitterness but a quiet grief for how easily love could become invisible when placed in the hands of someone who stopped being grateful. Behind her, the gala tried to continue. Forks touched plates. Glasses lifted again. Someone laughed too loudly. But the evening had already changed. Naomi stepped into the elevator alone, the music fading above her as the doors closed. For the first time in 12 years, she did not wonder how to save her marriage. She wondered how many parts of herself she had abandoned trying to protect it. And as the elevator descended toward the lobby, Naomi Brooks made one silent promise beneath the soft hum of polished steel. She would never again stay at a table where her absence was the only way people learned her worth. The elevator doors opened to the private lobby of the Whitmore Grand, and for a moment Naomi Brooks stood perfectly still beneath the soft gold light, listening to the distant music above her fade into something that no longer belonged to her. Outside the revolving glass doors, Manhattan glimmered after a light spring rain, the pavement shining like black satin, yellow taxis sliding past, strangers hurrying beneath umbrellas as if the world had not just split quietly in two. She stepped into the night without calling for Caleb's driver. The cool air touched her face, and she welcomed it. It was honest in a way the ballroom had not been. Her phone began to vibrate before she reached the curb. Caleb. Then Caleb again. Then a message from his assistant asking where she had gone, as if she were a misplaced purse or a missing coat. Naomi placed the phone inside her clutch and kept walking. 6 blocks away, the city changed its language. The polished hotels gave way to smaller storefronts, late-night delis, laundromats glowing under fluorescent lights, and apartment windows where real families lived behind thin curtains and unpaid bills. Naomi knew these streets better than anyone at that gala would ever guess. Years earlier, before the magazines called her Mrs. Whitmore, before stylists learned the exact shade of lipstick that photographed best against her deep brown skin, before Caleb's name opened every locked door in New York, she had walked these blocks with a clipboard in one hand and donated coats in the other. She had been 24 then, working for a Brooklyn nonprofit with a salary so small her mother used to joke that compassion should at least come with health insurance. That was where Caleb had first seen her, not beneath chandeliers, but in a community gym filled with folding chairs, paper cups of coffee, and tired parents trying to find a path back to stability. He had arrived in a navy suit that looked too expensive for the room, representing a developer who wanted to purchase the neighborhood center and turn it into luxury apartments. Naomi remembered how every volunteer went quiet when he introduced himself. She had not. She had stood at the back table, passed him a file of resident impact statements, and said, "Before you call this building underused, read the names of the people who use it." Caleb had looked at her then with surprise, then interest, then something softer. He came back the next week, then the week after that, not with lawyers, but with questions. He asked about heating costs, after-school programs, food insecurity, scholarship gaps, things wealthy people often discussed as statistics but rarely touched with both hands. Naomi did not make him feel guilty for being rich. She challenged him to become responsible for what his wealth could repair. That was what had made him different in her eyes. Not the tailored suits, not the family name, not the penthouse he rarely mentioned. It was the evening he rolled up his sleeves and helped paint a classroom wall a warm yellow because a little boy named Marcus said gray rooms made homework feel sad. Naomi had laughed that night. Caleb had gotten paint on his watch, and instead of complaining, he had smiled like he had been given something money could not buy. Their love grew in practical places, over budget reports, over takeout eaten from cardboard boxes, over long walks across the Brooklyn Bridge when the wind was sharp and Caleb listened more than he spoke. He told her that his world taught men to build higher, own more, and never admit loneliness. She told him that success without kindness was only noise wearing a good suit. When he proposed 2 years later, it was not in Paris or on a yacht. It was on the roof of the renovated community center, beneath string lights the children had helped hang, with the skyline glowing 12 miles away. He promised he would never make her smaller to make himself look powerful. Naomi believed him because, at the time, he believed himself. The first years of their marriage were not perfect, but they were real. She sat beside him in board meetings when investors questioned whether affordable housing belonged in a luxury hotel company's portfolio. She helped write speeches he received standing ovations for. She reviewed foundation grants after midnight, while Caleb slept with his hand resting near hers on the kitchen table. Slowly, the world began to admire the version of Caleb that Naomi had helped uncover. Magazine covers called him the billionaire with a conscience. Politicians invited him to panels. Universities gave him awards. At first, he always found Naomi in the audience. He would smile at her before speaking, as if to say, "This is ours." Then came the larger deals, the national interviews, the private clubs, the advisors who spoke in polished phrases about optics and influence. Caleb stopped asking what a project meant and started asking how it would look. He stopped saying our foundation and began saying my legacy. Naomi noticed the change the way a person notices winter entering a room, not all at once, but through small drafts. A corrected sentence at dinner. A meeting rescheduled without telling her. A photograph cropped so she stood just outside the frame. And eventually, Serena Vale, with her perfect press strategy and her talent for making ambition sound like destiny. By the time Naomi reached the corner of 8th Avenue, the first tear finally slipped down her cheek, but she wiped it away before it reached her chin. Not because pain was weakness, but because she understood something now with painful clarity. She had not lost the man Caleb used to be tonight. She had been losing him slowly for years, one unspoken thank you at a time. By the time Naomi reached Mrs. Alma Reed's community kitchen on West 37th Street, the night had softened into that quiet hour when Manhattan no longer looked glamorous, only tired. The metal gate was halfway down, but lights still glowed behind the front windows, warm and yellow, spilling across the sidewalk like an invitation. Inside, the last dinner service had ended. Folding chairs were stacked against the wall, stainless steel trays rested in the sink, and the faint smell of tomato soup, cornbread, and coffee lingered in the air. Naomi stood outside for a moment, one hand around the handle of her clutch, her midnight blue gown brushing against the wet pavement. In the reflection of the glass, she looked like a woman who had walked out of someone else's life and had not yet stepped fully into her own. Then the door opened. Mrs. Alma Reed looked at her from behind square reading glasses, a dish towel over one shoulder, her silver curls tucked beneath a faded blue headscarf. She did not ask why Naomi was there in evening clothes after 11 o'clock at night. She did not widen her eyes at the diamond necklace around Naomi's throat or the sorrow she was trying so hard to keep controlled. She simply stepped aside and said, "Come in, baby. The coffee is still warm." That was Alma's gift. She made dignity feel like shelter. Naomi entered, and the door closed behind her with a gentle click that sounded more merciful than any applause. For years, Alma had run that kitchen with a stubborn faith that hungry people deserved more than leftovers. She served meals on real plates whenever she could. She kept fresh flowers on the counter even when the roof leaked. She remembered birthdays, court dates, job interviews, and the names of children who had stopped believing adults listened. Naomi had met her during the first winter housing campaign, when Caleb's board called the kitchen too small to matter. Alma had looked at those men in their dark coats and said, "Small is where love starts when powerful people are too busy to notice." Naomi had never forgotten it. Tonight, those words returned like a hand on her back. She followed Alma into the kitchen, where a single pot of coffee sat beneath the buzzing light. Her phone vibrated again. "Caleb." Then a message. "Where are you? Do you understand what you just did?" Naomi placed the phone face down on the counter. Alma watched the movement and poured coffee into a chipped white mug. "A man who asks where you are before asking if you are all right has already answered the most important question," she said. Naomi wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat steady her fingers. For the first time that night, her voice nearly broke. He thanked her in front of everyone. Alma did not need to ask who. Women like Alma had seen enough rooms, enough marriages, enough polished men with careless hearts to understand the shape of humiliation without a full explanation. Naomi stared at the steam rising from the coffee. "I helped build that foundation. I stayed up after every gala writing grant letters. I remembered every family's name because he never had time to. And tonight, he looked at another woman like she was the reason he became who he is." Alma leaned against the sink, her face calm, but her eyes sad. Maybe she is the reason he became who he is now. That does not mean she is the reason he became worth loving. The sentence landed softly, but it opened something deep. Naomi looked down at her wedding ring. It was beautiful, expensive, flawless beneath the kitchen light. Caleb had chosen it from a Fifth Avenue jeweler, but he had given it to her on a rooftop in Brooklyn with paint still under his fingernails. That memory hurt more than the toast, because the man who had promised not to make her smaller had learned to do it without raising his voice. The signs had been there. Serena's silk scarf in the back seat of Caleb's car, folded too carefully to be accidental. The late-night strategy calls that stopped the second Naomi entered the room. The way Serena began answering questions meant for Caleb, smiling as if she were protecting him from inconvenience. The way Caleb corrected Naomi at a donor dinner when she mentioned the Shelter families by name, saying gently, publicly. Let us keep it high level tonight. High level. As if real people were too heavy for elegant conversation. Naomi had swallowed that moment because marriage teaches women to choose peace, and love teaches them to hope small wounds will not become a pattern. But patterns are patient. They build themselves in silence. Alma set a plate of cornbread beside the mug. Eat something. Naomi gave a small, tired laugh. I left before dessert. Then start with this, Alma said. It is not fancy, but it was made with respect. Naomi broke off a small piece, and the sweetness of it surprised her. Simple, warm, real. Tears gathered again, but this time she let them stay in her eyes without shame. Alma sat across from her and reached for her hand, not to comfort her into weakness, but to remind her she was still here. Listen to me, Alma said. Do not let his betrayal turn you into someone who only knows how to hurt back. But do not let your kindness become a place where people wipe their feet. You can forgive a wound and still refuse to sleep beside the knife. Naomi closed her eyes. In the ballroom, she had felt erased. In this small kitchen, under a buzzing light with coffee in a chipped mug, she felt her outline returning. Her phone vibrated again, but she did not reach for it. Somewhere above them, Caleb was probably explaining her absence, protecting his image, turning her pain into an inconvenience. Let him. For the first time, Naomi understood that silence did not have to mean surrender. Sometimes silence was a door closing carefully. Sometimes it was a woman gathering every broken piece of herself before the world realized she had already begun to leave. Morning came without kindness. It arrived through the narrow kitchen windows in pale gray lines, touching the metal counters, the stacked chairs, and the midnight blue gown Naomi still wore beneath Mrs. Alma Reed's old cardigan. She had slept for less than 2 hours on the small sofa in Alma's office, her heels placed neatly beside the door, her clutch under her folded hands like a final piece of armor. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she heard was not Caleb's voice, not applause, not the clink of crystal, but the soft rhythm of Alma stirring oatmeal in a pot large enough to feed 20 people. The world had not ended. Breakfast still had to be served. That truth steadied her more than comfort ever could. By 7 o'clock, Naomi had tied her hair back, slipped into a clean apron, and stood behind the counter pouring coffee for men and women who thanked her without knowing who she had been the night before. A retired bus driver named Mr. Harris complimented her necklace and said it looked like something from a movie. Naomi smiled and touched the diamonds lightly. It belonged to a life I am returning, she said, and he nodded as if he understood far more than she had said. Her phone stayed silent for almost an hour. Then the calls began again. Caleb, his assistant, a board member, a public relations consultant. Each name appeared on the screen like a hand knocking on a door she no longer lived behind. At 8:15, a message from Caleb finally came through, cold and polished enough to sound reviewed before being sent. We need to discuss last night before the press makes this worse. Naomi read it once. Not before you are all right. Not I hurt you. Not I am sorry. The press. The image. The damage. She set the phone beside a basket of plastic-wrapped muffins and continued serving breakfast. At 9:30, a black town car stopped outside the kitchen. Through the front window, Naomi saw Caleb step onto the sidewalk in the same tuxedo pants from the night before, his bow tie gone, his white shirt open at the collar, his face marked by the sleepless irritation of a man unaccustomed to consequences arriving before he was ready. He looked out of place on that block, too expensive for the cracked pavement, too controlled for the smell of coffee and dish soap drifting through the open door. Alma saw him too. She wiped her hands on a towel and stood beside Naomi without speaking. Caleb entered as if the room should rearrange itself around him. It did not. A few people glanced up from their trays, then returned to breakfast. For the first time in years, Caleb Whitmore walked into a room where his last name meant nothing. Naomi, he said quietly, though his jaw was tight. We are leaving. She placed a cup of coffee on the counter for an elderly woman and turned to him. Good morning, Caleb. The calmness in her voice unsettled him more than anger would have. He looked at the apron, the cardigan, the chipped mug near her elbow. You spent the night here. Yes. Do you have any idea how that looks? Naomi studied him with the patience one gives a stranger who has missed the point entirely. I know exactly how it looks. It looks like I went somewhere I was respected. A small silence moved through the kitchen. Caleb lowered his voice. This is not the place for this conversation. No, Naomi said. The place was last night, before you raised a glass to another woman and made your wife invisible in front of the entire city. His eyes flickered toward Alma, then toward the people eating breakfast, as if witnesses offended him more than his own behavior. Serena handled a difficult year for the company. I acknowledge that. You overreacted. There it was. The little word men used when they wanted to make a woman's pain sound like bad weather. Naomi untied the apron slowly and folded it on the counter. You did not just acknowledge her. You replaced me in a story I helped write. Caleb exhaled through his nose, impatient, wounded in his pride, but not yet humble in his heart. You know what my life requires. Public moments are complicated. Respect is not complicated. The sentence was quiet, but it landed cleanly. Caleb looked at her then, really looked, and for 1 second Naomi saw not guilt, but fear. Not fear of losing her, not yet. Fear of losing control over the version of himself the world admired. He stepped closer. Come home. We will manage this privately. Naomi slipped the diamond necklace from her throat and placed it on the counter between them. The stones flashed under the fluorescent light, beautiful and cold. I am going to our penthouse once, she said. I will take what is mine, and then I will speak to an attorney. Caleb stared at the necklace as if it had become evidence. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious. His voice softened then, not with tenderness, but strategy. Naomi, do not throw away 12 years because of one toast. She picked up her clutch, her wedding ring still shining on her hand, though it suddenly felt less like a promise and more like a question she had already answered. It was never one toast, Caleb. It was every meeting where you forgot my name, every speech where you used my words and thanked your team, every photograph where I was close enough to support you and far enough to be cropped out. Last night was not the beginning. It was the moment I stopped pretending I did not see the ending. For once, Caleb had no immediate reply. Around them, breakfast continued. Spoons tapped bowls. Coffee poured. Life moved forward with or without his permission. Naomi walked past him toward the door, and Alma reached for her hand just long enough to press strength into her palm. Outside, the morning air was cool, and the city smelled of rain, bread, exhaust, and beginnings. Caleb followed 2 steps behind, no longer leading. Not yet abandoned, but no longer obeyed. And as Naomi stepped into the waiting town car, she understood that leaving the ballroom had been instinct, but leaving the marriage would be a decision. A clear one, a costly one, a necessary one. This time, she would not disappear in silence. She would depart with her name intact. The ride to the penthouse took 23 minutes, though Naomi felt every block like a page being turned by hands she could not see. Caleb sat across from her in the town car, his phone in one hand, his silence in the other, while Manhattan moved past the tinted windows in streaks of silver, brick, and morning light. He made 3 calls before they reached Park Avenue, each one careful, clipped, and designed to contain the damage. No comment until I approve language. Do not let Serena speak to anyone. Tell the board this is a private misunderstanding. Naomi watched him manage the collapse of their marriage with the same tone he used for construction delays and quarterly reports. It should have broken her. Instead, it clarified everything. When the elevator opened into their penthouse, the familiar scent of cedar, white roses, and polished stone greeted her like a room pretending nothing had happened. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, touching the cream furniture, the art Caleb's consultant had chosen, the grand piano no one played, and the framed magazine cover that called him America's most compassionate billionaire. Naomi looked at that headline for a long second, then walked past it. Caleb followed her into the bedroom, his patience thinning now that there were no witnesses. You are making this larger than it needs to be, he said. Naomi opened the walk-in closet and took out a small suitcase from the top shelf. No, Caleb. I am finally allowing it to be as large as it has always been. He stood in the doorway while she moved through the closet with quiet precision. She packed practical clothes first. A black coat, 2 pairs of jeans, white blouses, a navy sweater her mother had knitted before passing away, then a folder from the locked drawer beneath her scarves, filled with copies of foundation proposals, donor letters, housing contracts, photographs, and handwritten notes from families whose lives had been changed by work Caleb had once called her little mission. His eyes narrowed when he saw it. Those are company materials. These are records of projects I created before the company decided they were useful for your image. Everything connected to Whitmore Foundation belongs to Whitmore Group. Naomi closed the folder and placed it in her suitcase. That is what attorneys are for. The word landed between them like a dropped glass. Caleb stepped fully into the room. You want a divorce? It was not a question. Naomi turned toward the dresser, where their wedding photograph stood in a silver frame. Brooklyn rooftop, string lights. Caleb smiling with paint still faintly visible near his wrist. Naomi laughing as if life had opened every door at once. She picked up the frame and held it gently. I wanted a husband who remembered what he promised. Since he is no longer here, yes, I want a divorce. For the first time, something unguarded crossed Caleb's face. Not remorse exactly. Shock. The kind that comes when a man realizes a woman he considered patient had actually been preparing her courage in silence. Naomi, listen to yourself. 12 years. Our home. Our foundation. Our life. You are going to walk away over public embarrassment. She set the photograph face down on the dresser, not out of hatred, but because she could not keep speaking to a memory while standing before the man who had abandoned it. Public embarrassment is what happened last night. The reason I am leaving is private disrespect. Caleb dragged a hand through his dark blonde hair, the controlled image beginning to fray. Serena is not what you think. Serena is not the center of this. Then what do you want from me? His voice rose slightly, not loud enough to frighten, only enough to reveal panic wearing pride. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. That is the saddest part. I used to want everything from you. Partnership, honesty, respect, a shared purpose. Now I want nothing you are not willing to give freely. She removed the wedding ring from her finger slowly. Her skin bore the faint pale mark of 12 years beneath it. She placed the ring inside the small velvet box still tucked in the back of her jewelry drawer, the same box Caleb had opened beneath the Brooklyn string lights. The sound of the lid closing was soft, but Caleb flinched as if something final had spoken. Keep the penthouse, she said. Keep the cameras, the consultants, the interviews, the version of the story that helps you sleep. I will not fight you in the press. I will not trade pain for headlines. But I will not let you use my work, my name, or my silence to decorate your reputation anymore. By noon, Naomi was sitting in the office of Marisol Grant, a divorce attorney known not for cruelty, but for clean lines and steady hands. Marisol listened without interruption while Naomi explained the foundation, the gala, the years of invisible labor. Then she placed a yellow legal pad on the desk and said, "We are not here to punish him. We are here to protect you." Naomi exhaled, and for the first time that day, the room felt breathable. The divorce filing began quietly. No leaked messages. No dramatic accusations. No performance of suffering for people who enjoyed watching women break. Only documents, dates, ownership records, and the calm restoration of boundaries. That evening, Naomi checked into a modest hotel near the community kitchen. The room had one queen bed, a desk, and a view of a brick wall painted with fading blue clouds. It was not beautiful. It was not hers yet. But when she locked the door behind her, placed her suitcase beside the bed, and removed the diamond earrings Caleb had given her for their 10th anniversary, Naomi felt something she had not felt in years. Space. Not emptiness. Space. And in that space, small but undeniable, her own name began to sound like home. The first winter after Naomi left Caleb Whitmore did not look like victory. It looked like a borrowed desk in the back of Mrs. Alma Reed's community kitchen, a second-hand laptop with a cracked corner, and a paper cup of coffee gone cold beside a stack of grant applications. It looked like Naomi wearing the same navy sweater 3 days in 1 week, because she had learned that rebuilding a life required fewer clothes than people imagined and far more courage than anyone admitted. The divorce moved quietly through conference rooms and legal filings, each document stripping away another layer of the life the world had mistaken for a fairy tale. Caleb kept the penthouse, the magazine covers, the polished statements. Naomi kept her records, her memory, and the names of every family whose story had once been reduced to a line item in his annual report. Marisol Grant secured her legal right to separate the community programs she had created before Whitmore Group absorbed them. And when the final agreement was signed, Naomi did not celebrate. She walked to the Hudson River, stood beneath a sky the color of steel, and let the wind remind her that freedom could feel cold before it felt beautiful. 3 weeks later, Brooks' House Initiative was born in a room above the kitchen where the heat clicked loudly. The carpet had seen better years, and the first board meeting consisted of Naomi, Alma, a retired housing attorney named Jerome Ellis, and 2 folding chairs that wobbled when anyone shifted too quickly. There were no chandeliers, no champagne, no photographers waiting near the door. Naomi wrote the mission statement herself in black ink across a legal pad. Housing with dignity, opportunity with accountability, help without humiliation. Alma read it twice, then nodded. That sounds like a place people can breathe. Naomi smiled for the first time in days. Breathing was enough to begin. The early months were not cinematic from the outside. They were phone calls, rejection letters, budget spreadsheets, subway rides across Brooklyn and Queens, community meetings in church basements, and evenings spent listening to women explain how quickly life could collapse when one paycheck disappeared. Naomi learned to ask better questions. Not what happened to you, but what do you need first? Not why did you stay, but who made leaving possible? Not how can we save you, but how can we stand beside you while you save yourself? Each answer became part of the foundation she was building, not with marble or glass, but with trust. She hired people others overlooked because she understood the cost of being unseen. A single mother who had once slept in her car became the intake coordinator because she knew how to speak to frightened applicants without making them feel small. A former construction worker recovering from financial ruin became the facilities manager because he could repair broken steps and broken confidence with the same patient hands. A college student who had grown up in temporary housing helped design the scholarship program because he knew that a laptop could matter as much as a lease. Little by little, Brooks' house began to move. 1 apartment secured, then 3, then 8. A local grocery chain donated gift cards after Naomi walked into the owner's office with a folder of real family budgets and refused to turn poverty into a performance. A school principal offered after-hours classrooms for financial literacy workshops. A dentist volunteered 1 Saturday a month because Alma told him kindness counted more when it cost convenience. Naomi worked until her eyes burned, but the exhaustion felt different from the years beside Caleb. Back then, she had been tired from disappearing. Now she was tired from becoming. Across town, Whitmore Group shone brighter and felt emptier. Serena Vale arranged sleek interviews, glossy campaigns, and carefully staged charity appearances where Caleb stood beside oversized checks and spoke about impact in sentences Naomi would never have written. The photographs looked perfect. The results did not. Applications to the old foundation slowed. Community partners stopped returning calls. One shelter director quietly redirected families to Brooks' house, saying only, "Naomi listens." Caleb heard her name first in a board meeting, then in a donor launch, then from a city official who praised Brooks' house for doing more with $50,000 than some organizations did with $5 million. Each time, he kept his face composed. Each time, something in him tightened. Naomi did not know any of this. She was too busy carrying boxes into the first Brooks' house family apartment, a 2-bedroom walk-up in Queens with clean windows, sturdy locks, and sunlight that landed on the kitchen floor every morning. The first family to move in was a mother named Denise and her 8-year-old son, Marcus, who asked if he was allowed to put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Naomi handed him a small packet from her coat pocket and said, "Only if you promise to dream bigger than this room." That evening, after the volunteers left, Naomi stood alone in the empty hallway, paint on her sleeve and dust on her shoes. Her phone buzzed with an alert from a business magazine. Caleb Whitmore and Serena Vale lead new era of public giving. Naomi looked at the headline, then at the apartment door where Marcus had taped a drawing of a house with yellow windows and 4 smiling people. For the first time, Caleb's world did not feel above her or behind her. It felt far away. She slipped the phone into her pocket, turned off the hallway light, and walked into the cold evening with her shoulders straight. She had not built an empire yet. She had built one safe room. And sometimes, one safe room was where a woman learned she could build a future. 3 years later, the invitation arrived in a cream envelope, so heavy it felt almost ceremonial. Naomi found it on her desk at the Brooks House office, tucked between a housing inspection report and a thank you card written in purple marker by a little girl who had finally gotten her own bed. The return address made Alma go still when she saw it. Whitmore Grand Hotel. Naomi did not open it immediately. She placed one hand on the envelope and looked around the room that had once been a dusty office above a community kitchen. Now it hummed with life. Phones rang. Case managers moved between desks with folders under their arms. A wall map of New York City was covered in blue pins marking families housed, green pins marking job placements, and gold pins marking students awarded scholarships. The carpet was still old. The heat still clicked too loudly in winter. But there was a pulse here that no marble ballroom had ever held. Finally, Naomi opened the envelope with a letter opener Alma had bought from a street vendor for $2. The National Housing Equity Council was honoring Brooks' House Initiative at its annual gala, and Naomi Brooks had been selected as the keynote speaker. The event would be held in the same ballroom where she had once stood up before dessert and walked away from a life that had trained her to be grateful for being overlooked. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Alma smiled slowly. "Well," she said, "sometimes life does not close a door. It waits until you can walk back through it without shrinking." Naomi laughed softly, but her fingers trembled just enough for her to notice. She had not entered the Whitmore Grand since the night everything changed. She had passed it in taxis. She had seen it in magazines. She had watched Caleb's name remain bright on its entrance while her own became brighter in places that mattered differently. Brooks' House, now operated in 4 boroughs, had secured more than 80 transitional apartments and had helped hundreds of families move from crisis into stability. Naomi had spoken at city hearings, universities, and church conferences, but this invitation carried a different weight. Not because of Caleb. Because of the woman she had been the last time she stood in that room. On the night of the gala, Naomi chose a white tailored gown with long sleeves and clean lines, not bridal, not fragile, but luminous in its restraint. Her hair was swept back, her earrings small, her hands bare except for a simple gold ring she had bought for herself after the divorce, not as a replacement, but as a reminder that commitment could begin with the person in the mirror. When she stepped out of the car in front of the hotel, the evening air smelled of rain, perfume, and cameras warming beneath bright lights. Reporters called her name now. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Naomi Brooks. Founder. Advocate. Leader. She paused beneath the entrance canopy, looking up at the hotel's glowing sign. Her chest tightened once, then released. She was not returning to the past. She was arriving with proof that the past had not kept her. Inside, the ballroom looked almost unchanged. The same chandeliers. The same marble columns. The same terrace doors overlooking the city. But Naomi was different, and because she was different, the room obeyed a new truth. People turned toward her with respect that did not need translation. City officials approached to thank her. Mothers she had helped stood near the front with tears in their eyes. Jerome Ellis adjusted his tie and whispered, "You built this with receipts and grace." Alma, seated proudly in the first row, lifted her chin as if she had known this ending all along. Then Naomi saw Caleb. He stood near the donor wall in a dark tuxedo, older around the eyes, still handsome, still polished, but no longer untouchable. Serena Vale stood beside him in silver, her smile prepared for photographs but strained at the edges. Caleb's gaze met Naomi's across the ballroom, and the years between them seemed to draw one quiet breath. He looked as if he wanted to cross the room, but did not know what right he had left. Naomi gave him a small nod, not warm, not cruel, simply complete. Then the lights dimmed, and her name was announced. Applause rose, full and steady, not the brittle applause of people protecting power, but the kind that comes when a room understands that someone has carried real weight and refused to let it harden her heart. Naomi walked to the podium. The microphone waited. So did the chandelier light. So did the memory of the woman who had once left this room with nothing but her dignity. Naomi looked out at the faces before her and began. A home is not just a place where people sleep. It is the first room where a person learns whether the world believes they matter. The ballroom became silent. Caleb lowered his eyes. Serena's smile vanished. Naomi did not mention either of them. She did not need to. Her story was no longer shaped by who had failed to honor her. It was shaped by every life she had helped rebuild after choosing not to disappear. When Naomi finished speaking, the silence held for one suspended second before the ballroom rose to its feet. The applause did not rush this time. It gathered slowly, Honestly, like rain becoming a river. Mothers stood first, then social workers, then city officials, then donors who had come expecting another elegant fundraiser and instead found themselves listening to a woman who made compassion sound practical, urgent, and impossible to ignore. Naomi stepped back from the podium with both hands resting lightly at her sides, her face calm, her eyes bright but dry. She had learned long ago that tears were not the only proof of feeling. Sometimes proof was the steady voice that remained after heartbreak tried to take it. Alma wiped her eyes with the corner of her program. Jerome Ellis clapped with his chin lifted high. Across the room, Caleb Whitmore remained seated for a moment longer than everyone else, not because he refused to stand, but because something inside him had finally lost the strength to pretend. On the screen behind Naomi, images continued to fade in and out. A rebuilt apartment in Queens. A classroom workshop in the Bronx. A mother receiving keys with her son pressed against her side. Naomi kneeling beside a little girl as they taped paper stars to a ceiling. Caleb stared at those pictures and felt the terrible clarity of recognition. This was not new. This had always been Naomi. He had simply stopped looking. When he finally stood, the applause had already become thunder, but to him it sounded far away, buried beneath another memory. Naomi at their kitchen table years earlier, writing grant letters while he practiced a speech the city later praised as visionary. He remembered how she had circled one paragraph in red pen and said, "Do not say you are giving people dignity. Say you are protecting the dignity they already have." He had used the line. He had received the standing ovation. He had thanked his communications team, not her. After the ceremony, guests moved toward the reception hall where desserts were arranged beneath glass domes. Small perfect cakes dusted with powdered sugar, lemon tarts with gold leaf, chocolate cups no one would finish. Naomi stood near the terrace doors, accepting congratulations with grace that never became performance. Caleb watched from beside a marble column while Serena spoke to a donor with forced brightness. She had been praised for polish, for influence, for turning generosity into spectacle. Tonight, those skills looked thin beside the weight of real service. At last, Caleb crossed the room. People noticed. They tried not to stare, which only made their attention more obvious. Naomi saw him coming and did not move away. She simply excused herself from the conversation and stepped onto the terrace, where the city lights spread beneath the night like thousands of unanswered prayers. Caleb followed, stopping a few feet behind her. For a moment, neither spoke. Wind moved gently through the space between them. "You were extraordinary tonight," he said. Naomi looked out over Manhattan. "Thank you." Her voice gave him nothing more to hold. He swallowed. "I used to think I built the best parts of my life." A bitter, quiet smile touched his face. "I was wrong. You were there building them with me, and most of the time, I was taking credit for the walls while you kept the foundation from cracking." Naomi turned then. The terrace light softened the angles of his face, showing the years he had tried to hide with discipline and expensive sleep. "Why are you telling me this now, Caleb?" He looked down at his hands, hands that had signed billion-dollar deals, accepted awards, held microphones, and once held hers as if he understood what a gift meant. "Because tonight I saw what my pride cost me. Not just the marriage. You, the person who made me better before the world convinced me I was already enough." Inside the ballroom, Serena stood near the doorway, close enough to hear only fragments. Her expression did not break dramatically. It emptied slowly. Perhaps she understood then that winning a place at a man's table was not the same as being loved in his heart. Caleb took one careful breath. "I am sorry, Naomi. Not for the press. Not for the embarrassment. For every quiet way I made you invisible and called it partnership. For letting ambition teach me to confuse attention with respect. For thanking everyone but the woman who gave my success a soul." Naomi listened without interrupting. Once, those words might have unlocked every door inside her. Once, she would have stepped toward him with relief, so deep it felt like forgiveness. But healing had changed the shape of her heart. It had not made it colder. It had made it honest. "I accept your apology," she said. Caleb's eyes lifted, fragile with hope he had not earned. Naomi saw it and spoke before it could grow into expectation. But forgiveness is not an invitation to return. The hope dimmed, and this time he did not argue. That alone told her he was finally beginning to understand. "I know," he whispered. Naomi looked back toward the ballroom. where Brooks' house staff laughed near the dessert table and Alma was telling a city commissioner something with her finger raised. You taught me something painful, Caleb. I used to think love meant staying until someone remembered your worth. Now I know love must include the wisdom to leave when forgetting becomes a habit. He nodded slowly, the lesson settling where pride once lived. Can I do anything? Naomi considered him with neither cruelty nor softness. Yes, do good where no one is watching. Give without needing your name on a wall. And when someone stands beside you, never mistake their silence for emptiness. Caleb's face tightened, but he accepted the words like a sentence he deserved. Naomi stepped past him toward the lighted doors. At the threshold, she paused. The dessert table gleamed inside, untouched by old sorrow. Good night, Caleb. He watched her re-enter the ballroom to the applause, laughter, and warmth she had built without him. For the first time, he did not follow. Some losses were not punishments. They were mirrors. And Caleb Whitmore, standing alone beneath the terrace lights, finally saw the man he had become clearly enough to grieve him. 3 months after the gala, the first Saturday of spring arrived warm enough to open the windows at Brooks' house. Sunlight moved across the community room in wide golden rectangles, landing on paper plates, folded napkins, fresh flowers in mason jars, and a long table covered with desserts that had been baked by the families themselves. There were peach cobblers cooling beside chocolate cupcakes, lemon bars dusted with powdered sugar, banana pudding in glass bowls, and one slightly uneven vanilla cake decorated by Marcus with blue icing stars. Nobody cared that the letters leaned to one side. The room smelled like sugar, coffee, and new paint. Children ran carefully between chairs because Alma had already warned them twice not to knock over the lemonade. Volunteers taped photographs to the wall, each one showing a different moment from the past 3 years. A mother turning the key to her first apartment, Jerome teaching a budgeting class with his sleeves rolled up, Alma laughing beside a stove full of soup, Naomi standing in the rain with a clipboard and a smile she had grown into slowly. Naomi watched from the doorway in a soft yellow dress, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, her face carrying the peace of a woman who no longer needed the world to mistake her calm for emptiness. Brooks' house had just opened its 12th transitional apartment, and the celebration was small enough to be honest. No press, no velvet ropes, no speeches written by consultants. Just people who knew the cost of a safe door and a bed that belonged to you. Denise walked over with Marcus beside her, taller now, his glow-in-the-dark stars still visible on the cuffs of his jacket where he had been decorating again. Miss Naomi, he said, holding out a paper plate with a large slice of the uneven cake. You have to try this before everyone else does. Naomi accepted it with the seriousness of a royal honor. Then I will consider myself very lucky. Marcus looked at her for a moment with the open curiosity only children can carry without cruelty. Were you scared when you left your old life? The question softened the room around her. Denise touched his shoulder, embarrassed, but Naomi shook her head gently. She crouched so her eyes were level with his. Yes, she said. Very scared. He frowned. Then how did you do it? Naomi looked toward the windows, where spring light rested on the floor like a promise that did not need applause. I stopped asking whether leaving would hurt, she said. And I started asking whether staying would teach me to forget who I was. Marcus thought about that, then nodded as if she had given him instructions for assembling something important. So leaving can be brave even if you cry? Naomi smiled. Especially then. Across town, Caleb Whitmore sat alone in his office overlooking Park Avenue. The city stretched beneath him in clean, expensive lines. On his desk lay a donation confirmation for Brooks' House Initiative. $1 million, anonymous. No press release. No plaque request. No dinner invitation. For the first time in his adult life, he had given something large without asking it to carry his name back to him. Beside the confirmation was a letter from Naomi, handwritten on simple cream paper. Thank you for supporting the work. Let the good be bigger than the giver. Caleb read the sentence more than once. It did not forgive him again. It did not invite him back. It did something harder. It asked him to become better without being rewarded for it. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of his desk, beside no photograph, no headline, no symbol of victory. Just a reminder. Serena had left Whitmore Group 6 weeks after the gala, accepting a position in Los Angeles with another company that admired her polish. Their goodbye had been civil and empty. Two ambitious people standing in a room where neither had enough tenderness to make the silence hurt. Caleb did not blame her anymore. That, too, was part of his growth. It was easier to blame the person who entered the room than to admit he had opened the door by neglecting what was sacred. Back at Brooke's house, the celebration settled into laughter. Alma raised a plastic cup of sweet tea and demanded everyone listen, which everyone did because Alma had a way of making obedience feel like affection. To safe homes, she said, to second chances, and to women who learn that grace is not the same as permission. The room cheered. Naomi lowered her head for a moment, not from sadness, but from gratitude so full it needed somewhere quiet to go. Later, after the dishes were washed and the children had gone home with frosting on their sleeves, Naomi stepped outside alone. The evening had turned lavender over the rooftops, and the city sounded softer than usual, as if even New York understood when a soul had survived something private. She walked the few blocks to the river, the same river where she had once stood after signing the divorce papers, cold and uncertain, freedom wrapped around her like a coat, not yet warm. Now the air was gentle. Now her name did not feel like something she had to rescue. It felt like something she had built. She thought of the ballroom, the toast, the dessert she never ate, the ring returned to its box, the little kitchen where Alma gave her coffee and truth. None of it disappeared. Healing did not erase the past. It taught the past where to stand. Naomi watched the water catch the last light of day and understood that her life had not become beautiful because Caleb regretted losing her. It had become beautiful because she had learned not to lose herself. Love, she now knew, was not proven by how much pain a person endured in silence. Love was proven by respect, by honesty, by the daily choice to make another human being feel seen. And when that choice disappeared, dignity was allowed to walk away. Naomi turned from the river and headed back toward Brooke's house, where the windows glowed warm against the coming night. Behind those windows were people rebuilding, laughing, learning, beginning again. She opened the door and stepped inside, not as the woman who had been left out of a toast, not as the former wife of a billionaire, but as Naomi Brooks, a woman who had carried heartbreak without letting it harden her hands, a woman who had turned absence into shelter, and a woman who finally understood that the sweetest part of life was never dessert served at a rich man's table, but the peace of sitting where your soul is respected.